The interrogation room smelled faintly of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. A thin file slid across the metal table toward me, its manila edge catching the fluorescent light. "Primary suspect is in custody," the duty officer said quietly. "Civilian contractor. Possible foreign contact. Your lead on this one." I opened the file expecting another stranger, another name I'd forget once the case closed. Instead, my breath stopped. The photo showed a familiar smile I hadn't seen in years, older now, sharper but unmistakable. My older sister. The room seemed to tilt. "You'll conduct the interview in 15 minutes, he added. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers suddenly numb. 15 years of silence collapsed into a single moment, and I realized the operation I'd been building for months had just become something else entirely. I leaned back in my chair, forcing my breathing to steady the way I'd learned during training. Control first, emotion later. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead indifferent. Outside the glass panel, analysts moved quietly, unaware that my past had just walked into the present wearing handcuffs. I looked down again at her name printed in stark black letters. Emily Carter. The same name that had once been written across birthday cards, across shared bedroom walls, across the only family I'd ever known. 15 years earlier, I had stood in a very different room holding an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. My acceptance letter to Westbrook Military Academy. I remember the smell of the paper, the crispness of the seal, the way my hands trembled as I read it for the 5th time. My father had clapped me on the shoulder that night, pride flickering in his eyes. My mother cried quietly, smiling through it. Emily hugged me last. Her arms were warm, her voice soft. "You're really doing this," she said. "You're going to be the first one in our family." I thought she meant it. For weeks, the house felt lighter. My father asked about uniforms. My mother bought notebooks. Emily asked questions about dorm life, about training schedules, about how long I'd be gone. She seemed curious, almost fascinated. Looking back now, I remember the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't looking quiet, measuring. But at the time, I only saw my sister. A week before I was scheduled to report, I left home early to finalize paperwork. It was supposed to be a simple visit, sign forms, meet orientation staff, confirm my arrival date. The campus smelled like cut grass and old brick, and I remember thinking how quiet everything felt, like stepping into the life I'd imagined for years. The receptionist smiled politely when I gave my name, then frowned slightly as she checked the system. One moment she said, her tone shifting. She made a phone call, spoke in low whispers, then asked me to wait. A few minutes later, a uniformed administrator appeared and gestured toward his office. The room was neat, almost sterile. He sat across from me and folded his hands. "Miss Carter," he began carefully, "we received your withdrawal request 3 days ago." I stared at him, not understanding. "Withdrawal request?" He turned his monitor toward me. An email filled the screen. My name, my address. A short message stating I had reconsidered and would not attend. My chest tightened. I didn't send that. He nodded slowly like he'd heard that before. "We verified the request with your listed family contact." My stomach dropped. "Who?" He checked the file. "Your sister, Emily Carter." The room went quiet except for the ticking clock behind him. I remember staring at the screen, trying to process what he was saying. "There has to be a mistake," I whispered. "I'm afraid the slot has already been reassigned," he replied gently. "If you wish to reapply next year." I didn't hear the rest. My ears rang and everything blurred. I left the office without remembering how I got to the parking lot. My hands shook so badly I dropped my phone twice before dialing home. No answer. I called again. And again. Each ring felt longer than the last. Finally, a message came through. From Emily. "You weren't ready. I saved you." I read it 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to drive home. The familiar road felt different, like it no longer belonged to me. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked unchanged. Same porch swing, same curtains. But something inside me already knew everything had shifted. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. She didn't stand, didn't smile, just watched me. My parents looked up confused. I held my phone out. "Why did you do this?" Emily exhaled slowly like she'd been expecting the question. Because you were going to fail, she said calmly. I stopped you before you embarrassed yourself. The words hit harder than I expected. My father frowned. What's going on? She panicked. Emily explained, her tone controlled, almost sympathetic. She told me she didn't think she could handle it. She asked me to withdraw for her. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. I never. Emily shrugged lightly. You don't remember you were crying. You said you weren't ready. My mother looked at me, uncertainty clouding her face. My father's jaw tightened. I realized then how carefully Emily had prepared this. She spoke with quiet confidence, weaving details that sounded believable. And I, young, shocked, desperate, couldn't form the words fast enough to counter her. I didn't send that email, I repeated, but it sounded weaker each time. Emily leaned back in her chair. You don't have to pretend anymore. It's okay to admit you changed your mind. I felt something inside me fracture, a quiet crack that would take years to fully understand. I looked from her to my parents, searching for belief, for trust, for anything. But all I saw was doubt. And that was the moment I realized my sister hadn't just taken my place at the academy. She had taken my voice. When I woke the next morning, the house felt quieter than usual, as if the air itself had decided to hold its breath. My suitcase still sat by the door, half-packed for a life that had already been taken from me. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, cutting narrow lines across the kitchen floor. I could hear my parents talking in low voices, the kind meant to stay private but loud enough to sting. My name surfaced, once then disappeared again. I stood there for a moment listening, realizing they were already discussing me as if I were a problem to solve, rather than a daughter to believe. Emily sat at the table again, sipping coffee. She didn't look surprised to see me. You should talk to them, she said calmly. They're worried. I laughed softly, though it sounded hollow. Worried or disappointed? She tilted her head, studying me. You made a big decision. They deserve to understand. I didn't make that decision. She didn't respond. Instead, she took another sip, eyes steady. It was the quiet confidence that unsettled me most. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't angry. She looked like someone who had already won. My father stepped into the kitchen a moment later. His expression was tight, controlled. Sit down, he said. We need to talk. I obeyed, though my hands felt numb as I folded them on the table. My mother joined us, her eyes red from crying. For a second, I thought she might reach for my hand. She didn't. Emily leaned back, letting them take the lead like she had already delivered her version of events. My father cleared his throat. Your sister told us you asked her to withdraw from the academy. That's not true, I said immediately. I never... She said you were scared, he continued, voice firm, that you didn't think you could handle the training. I was nervous, I admitted. Anyone would be. But I wasn't quitting. My mother shook her head slowly. Then why would Emily lie? The question landed harder than anything else. I looked at my sister, waiting for her to deny it, to soften, to give me something. She just met my gaze, unreadable. I don't know, I whispered, but she did. My father leaned back, disappointment shadowing his face. You've always been determined. That's why this doesn't make sense. Either you changed your mind, or you're not telling us the truth. I am telling you the truth. The room felt smaller. The ticking clock grew louder. My mother wiped her eyes. You could have told us you were scared. We would have understood. But asking your sister to handle it, then pretending you didn't? She trailed off, unable to finish. I didn't ask her, I said again, softer now. My voice sounded distant, even to me. Emily finally spoke. She called me late that night, she said gently. She was crying. She said she didn't want to disappoint you. She looked at my parents, not at me. I thought I was helping. I stared at her. The detail, the calm delivery, it was perfect, too perfect. And I realized then she hadn't just lied, she had built a story around the lie, something believable enough to survive scrutiny. My father sighed heavily. You should have come to us. I tried, I said, but the words felt weak. He shook his head. You withdrew. That's what matters now. We'll figure out what comes next. I didn't withdraw. Silence fell. My mother looked exhausted. My father rubbed his temples. Emily lowered her eyes as if she wished the argument would end. And in that moment, I understood something painful and irreversible. They weren't trying to decide who was telling the truth. They had already decided. My father's voice hardened slightly. If you weren't ready, that's okay. But you need to be honest with yourself. I am. He looked at me for a long moment, then spoke quietly. I thought you were stronger. The words cut deeper than any accusation. My mother turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks. You embarrassed us, she whispered. Everyone knew you got in. They were proud of you. I felt heat rise in my chest, not anger but something heavier, shame mixed with disbelief. I didn't do this, I said, though it sounded more like a plea now. Emily leaned forward slightly. Maybe you're just not military material, she said softly. I looked at her. The calmness was gone for a second, replaced by something sharper, something almost relieved. Then it vanished again. My father stood. Enough. We're not going to argue all day. You need time to figure yourself out. What does that mean? He hesitated, then spoke carefully. It means you take some time. Think about what you really want. Until then, maybe it's best if you don't come back here. The words didn't register at first. You're asking me to leave. I'm asking you to find direction, he replied, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother whispered, just for a while. Emily said nothing. I stood slowly, the room spinning slightly. The house I'd grown up in suddenly felt unfamiliar, like I was visiting someone else's life. I walked to the hallway, grabbed my half-packed suitcase, and paused at the door. Part of me expected someone to stop me, to call my name, to say this was all a misunderstanding. No one did. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. I loaded my bag into the trunk and sat behind the wheel, staring at the house. The curtains shifted slightly. I couldn't tell who was watching. My phone buzzed once. A message from Emily. Maybe this is better for you. I stared at the words, then turned the phone face down. My hands rested on the steering wheel, trembling. I realized I had nowhere to go. No plan, no backup, just silence. But beneath the shock, something else began to form, quiet, stubborn. If they believed I wasn't strong enough, I would prove them wrong. Not with words, with time. That afternoon, I drove to the recruiting office. The sergeant behind the desk looked up as I entered. Can I help you? I nodded. I want to enlist. He studied me for a moment, then slid a form across the desk. Why? I thought of my father's disappointment, my mother's tears, my sister's calm voice. And I answered simply, because I'm not done yet. Weeks later, I stood in line with other recruits, my civilian clothes replaced by standard-issue uniform. My hair was shorter, my name stitched above my pocket. The drill instructor paced in front of us, shouting commands that echoed across the training yard. When he stopped in front of me, he read my tag aloud. Private Carter. The word felt unfamiliar but solid, a new beginning built from something broken. And as I stared forward, I made a silent promise to myself one day the truth would surface. Not because I demanded it, but because I would become someone impossible to ignore. Basic training stripped away everything familiar within the first 48 hours. The days began before sunrise, when the sky was still gray and the air carried the smell of damp earth. Boots pounded against gravel, voices barked commands, and time blurred into a rhythm of movement, exhaustion, and repetition. I learned quickly that silence was easier than conversation. The others shared stories about home, about girlfriends and parents sending care packages. I listened, nodded when expected, and kept my own history locked away. It was simpler that way. No one asked why I never received letters. No one asked why I volunteered for extra drills or stayed behind after lights out to review manuals under the dim glow of a hallway bulb. Pain became routine. Blisters hardened into calluses. Muscles burned, then adapted. Each morning I woke before the alarm, already alert, as if my body had decided sleep was optional. The instructors noticed. One of them, Sergeant Mallory, stopped beside me during a field exercise. "You're pushing harder than necessary," he said quietly while the others crawled through mud ahead of us. "I'm just keeping up, Sergeant." He studied me for a moment. "No, you're chasing something." I didn't answer. He nodded once, like he understood more than I'd said. After that, he watched me differently, not with suspicion but with a kind of measured curiosity. When the others complained about the pace, I stayed quiet. When they joked about quitting, I ignored it. Every step felt like reclaiming something I had lost. Graduation came with less fanfare than I expected. We stood in formation while names were called. When mine echoed across the field, I felt a small, steady pride, not loud, not dramatic, just solid. There was no family in the crowd, no camera flashing. But I realized I didn't need it. The absence had become familiar, and in that familiarity I found clarity. My first assignment was routine logistics support, at a base far from anything resembling home. The work was structured, predictable. I kept my head down, learned procedures, and volunteered whenever something required extra attention. Months passed. I stopped counting them. Life narrowed to duty shifts, training rotations, and occasional quiet evenings in the barracks. One night while reviewing inventory reports, I noticed inconsistencies, small ones easy to dismiss. Numbers that didn't quite match shipments logged twice, minor discrepancies. I flagged them out of habit, expecting someone else to handle it. Instead, the report landed on Captain Reynolds's desk. He called me in the next morning. "You spotted these?" he asked, tapping the page. "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Most people don't bother. They assume someone else will fix it." "It looked wrong." He nodded slowly. "You like patterns?" "I like things making sense." A faint smile crossed his face. "You ever considered intelligence work?" The suggestion caught me off guard. "No, sir." "You should." He slid another document toward me. "Aptitude testing, voluntary. I think you'd do well." I took the form, unsure what to say. The idea felt distant, almost unreal. But something inside me stirred curiosity maybe, or the quiet drive that had pushed me since leaving home. I filled it out that afternoon. The testing process stretched over weeks, logic puzzles, behavioral interviews, scenario analysis. I treated each step like another drill, focusing on precision rather than expectation. When the results came back, Captain Reynolds called me in again. "You scored high," he said simply, "very high." I sat quietly, unsure how to respond. He folded his hands. "Military intelligence has an opening. If you accept, you'll transfer for specialized training." The decision should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt inevitable. "I accept, sir." Training was different from anything I'd experienced before. Less shouting, more observation. Instructors spoke in calm tones, emphasizing patience and detail. We learned to read inconsistencies in behavior, to track information across scattered sources, to recognize deception not through drama, but through subtle shifts, tone, timing, hesitation. The classroom smelled of coffee and dry erase markers, and the silence often felt heavier than the noise of basic training. I discovered I was good at it. Not because I was brilliant, but because I had learned to watch. Years of listening without speaking, of reading expressions in a room where trust had disappeared, had sharpened something inside me. Patterns emerged naturally. Motives became clearer. The instructors noticed. During one exercise, we analyzed a simulated leak. While others focused on obvious suspects, I pointed to a minor detail, a timestamp that didn't align with the rest. The instructor raised an eyebrow. "Walk me through that." I explained step by step. When I finished, he nodded. "You're thinking like an investigator." The words lingered long after the session ended. Months later, I received my new designation, intelligence officer. The title felt heavier than any rank I'd worn before. I stood outside the training building, the evening air cool against my face, and allowed myself a rare moment of reflection. I had rebuilt something, not the life I lost, but a different version of it, stronger and quieter. That night I returned to my quarters and found an envelope waiting on my desk. No return address. My name written in familiar handwriting. My chest tightened as I opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation. Emily's name printed in elegant script. No note, no explanation. Just the date, the venue, and the assumption that I would understand. I stared at it for a long time. The paper smelled faintly of perfume, a detail that felt deliberate. Memories surfaced, uninvited shared birthdays, whispered jokes, the sister I once trusted. Then I folded the invitation carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't tear it immediately. I just held it, weighing what it represented. Finally, I dropped it into the trash. The next morning, I reported for my first assignment as an intelligence officer. The hallway outside the operations center buzzed quietly with analysts and officers moving between briefings. Screens glowed with data. Conversations stayed low-controlled. I stepped inside aware that everything I had become led to this moment. My supervisor handed me a small stack of files. "Routine reviews," he said. "Nothing dramatic. Get familiar with the workflow." I nodded, taking the files. As I settled at my desk, I realized how far I had come from the girl standing in that academy office years ago. The loss still existed, but it no longer defined me. Instead, it had shaped me, sharpened my instincts, strengthened my patience. I opened the first file, scanning details, letting the familiar rhythm of analysis take over. Outside the window, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the compound. And in that quiet transition between day and night, I understood something clearly. The life I built in silence was stronger than the one I had lost in noise. The first sign that the case would be different came in the form of a minor discrepancy so small it would have slipped past most analysts. A logistics report flagged a shipment rerouted twice within 48 hours, each change approved through separate civilian contractors. It wasn't unusual on its own. Delays happened all the time. But the timestamps were too clean, the approvals too fast. Someone had moved the paperwork deliberately, leaving just enough distance to avoid scrutiny. I leaned back in my chair, studying the screen. The operations center hummed quietly around me, keyboards tapping, low voices trading updates. I marked the report and cross-referenced the contractor names. One appeared again in another file, a communications audit tied to restricted equipment maintenance. Then again in a financial disclosure flagged by another unit weeks earlier. 3 separate mentions, all minor, all unrelated on paper. Together they formed the faint outline of a pattern. "Something interesting?" my supervisor asked, pausing behind me. "Maybe," I said. "These contractors keep showing up around sensitive movements." He glanced at the screen. "Coincidence?" "Possibly, but the timing doesn't sit right." He nodded once. "Follow it, quietly." That was how it started. A quiet review that grew into something heavier. I requested access to archived correspondence, then procurement logs, then travel records. Each request built a clearer picture. The contractor company, Carter Logistics Consulting, operated as a middleman coordinating civilian deliveries for various defense-related projects. Legitimate on the surface. But buried in the data were irregularities, meetings scheduled off-site, encrypted communications, flagged by cyber monitoring, and small payments routed through shell accounts overseas. The deeper I looked, the more the pattern tightened. Someone inside the company was leaking non-classified but sensitive operational details, timelines, equipment transfers, route changes. Information harmless alone but dangerous in aggregate. Enough for a foreign contact to build a predictive model of movements. Counterintelligence territory. I compiled the findings and presented them during a closed briefing. The room smelled faintly of dry erase markers and stale coffee. Analysts leaned forward as I outlined the timeline. My voice stayed calm, controlled, even as the stakes became clearer. Primary vector appears to be civilian intermediary, I concluded. We recommend surveillance authorization and financial tracing. The senior officer nodded. Any specific individual? Not yet, I replied, but we're narrowing. Authorization came within hours. Surveillance teams began monitoring communications linked to the company. Financial analysts tracked the offshore accounts. Days passed with slow accumulation emails, meeting locations, fragments of conversation. The suspect communicated carefully, rarely using direct language. But patterns emerged: repeated contact with a foreign national flagged in previous investigations, coded references to shipment windows, and unexplained travel. One evening, a new surveillance photo appeared in the shared folder, a parking garage meeting. The lighting was dim, the image grainy. 2 figures stood near a sedan. I zoomed in, automatically focusing on posture, height, clothing. The woman turned slightly toward the camera, and the world seemed to narrow to a single point. The face was partially obscured, but the angle of the jaw, the tilt of her head, it felt familiar. Too familiar. I leaned closer, adjusting contrast. The image sharpened just enough. "Emily?" I sat back slowly, my pulse steady only because training demanded it. The room around me continued moving, phones ringing, analysts murmuring, but everything felt distant. I stared at the screen again, searching for doubt, for misidentification. The system ran facial comparison automatically, probability match high. I closed my eyes briefly, then reopened them. Procedure first, emotion later. I flagged the image for confirmation. Within minutes, another analyst responded. Looks like we've got our liaison, he wrote. Corporate Executive Emily Carter, CEO of Carter Logistics. The name appeared in text, stark and undeniable. My sister wasn't just connected to the company, she was leading it. I forwarded the update to my supervisor. He approached my desk, quietly reading the screen. You know her? He asked after a moment. I hesitated, then answered, She's my sister. He studied me carefully. You want to step back? The offer hung in the air. For a second I considered it. The clean distance, the safe removal. But something inside me resisted, not from revenge, not yet, but from clarity. I had built this case. I understood its structure. And stepping away felt like abandoning truth again. No, I said calmly, I can remain objective. He nodded slowly. Then document the relationship. We'll proceed with oversight. I completed the disclosure form, hands steady detailing the familial connection. Once filed, the investigation moved forward. Surveillance intensified. Financial tracing linked the offshore accounts directly to shell corporations tied to Carter Logistics. Communications intercepted over the next week revealed coded confirmations of delivery schedules. The case tightened. During the next briefing, I presented the updated findings. No one in the room reacted to the personal connection. They focused on the evidence, the implications. That professionalism grounded me. It turned the situation from personal history into operational reality. The warrant request followed. Probable cause, unauthorized dissemination of sensitive logistics data, supporting evidence, financial transfers, encrypted communications, surveillance imagery. The legal team reviewed the packet, asked precise questions, then approved. When the authorization came through, the operations timeline accelerated. Arrest teams coordinated entry points. Digital forensics prepared seizure protocols. The plan was precise, quiet, controlled. No spectacle, just procedure. The night before the operation, I stayed late reviewing the file. The building emptied, gradually, lights dimming one row at a time. I scrolled through the evidence again, forcing myself to see it as an investigator, not a sister. Patterns, timelines, motive. The emotional weight sat beneath the surface contained. At midnight, I closed the file. The decision had already been made. The operation would proceed at dawn. I turned off my monitor and walked into the hallway. The silence felt heavier than usual. 15 years earlier, my life had changed because of a lie. Now, another turning point approached, built not on accusation but on proof. As I reached the exit, my phone vibrated. A message from the operations lead, warrant signed, entry scheduled 0600. I read it once, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Outside, the air was cold, the sky still dark. Somewhere across the city, surveillance teams were already in position waiting for morning. And for the first time since seeing her name, I allowed myself a single thought: the truth was no longer something I had to chase. It was about to walk through a door. The operation began before sunrise. The sky was still dark, the kind of muted blue that settles over a city before anyone is awake enough to notice it. I stood in the mobile command vehicle headset resting loosely around my neck, watching live feeds from multiple cameras. Officers moved in synchronized silence, each team approaching from predetermined angles. No sirens, no flashing lights, just quiet precision. Entry teams in position, a voice reported. I glanced at the digital clock. 5:59. A second later, execute. The breach was clean. The front doors opened with controlled force, not dramatic, just enough. Officers flowed into the building like shadows. Inside, lights flickered on as confused employees stepped back, hands raised. The security camera feed showed Emily's office door at the end of a glass-walled corridor. She was already inside, seated behind her desk, phone pressed to her ear. Someone must have alerted her, or maybe she sensed something was wrong. The door opened, 2 agents entered. She stood immediately, startled. "What is this?" she demanded, voice sharp. "Emily Carter," one agent asked. "Yes. You're being detained pending investigation. Please step away from the desk." Her expression shifted from confusion to indignation. "This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea who—" Ma'am, please comply. She hesitated, eyes flicking between them. Then she set the phone down slowly. One agent read the warrant. The words sounded procedural, detached. She shook her head in disbelief. This must be a mistake, she said. Call my attorney. You'll have that opportunity. Her hands were guided behind her back. The metal cuffs clicked softly. She froze at the sound as if the reality hadn't reached her until that moment. Employees in the hallway stared, whispering. Emily's posture stiffened, pride refusing to collapse. I demand to know what this is about, she said coldly. You'll be briefed by the case officer. She was escorted out. The hallway fell silent as she passed, her heels echoing against the floor. The camera followed her to the vehicle outside. The door closed. The convoy moved. I watched the feed until it ended, then removed my headset. The room around me stayed quiet, professional. No one commented. They were used to operations like this. But for me, the distance between procedure and memory felt thin. 30 minutes later, she was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Standard environment, metal table, 2 chairs, camera in the corner. She sat upright, wrists uncuffed, now her composure returning piece by piece. She crossed her arms, chin slightly lifted, the same posture she used years ago at the kitchen table. She's asking for a lawyer, an agent told me. She'll get one, I replied, but I'll speak with her first. I picked up the case file and walked down the hallway. Each step felt measured, deliberate. The door stood ahead, closed, anonymous. For a moment I paused, letting my breathing steady. Then I pushed it open. Emily looked up. For a second she didn't recognize me. Her eyes scanned my uniform, the insignia, the controlled posture. Then something shifted. Recognition landed slowly like a delayed echo. Her mouth parted slightly. You. The word was barely audible. I stepped inside and closed the door. Good morning, Emily. She stared, disbelief replacing irritation. This is your case. Yes. Her laugh came out sharp, almost defensive. No, that's not possible. I set the file on the table and sat down across from her. You're being investigated for unauthorized dissemination of sensitive operational information. We'll begin with a few questions. She leaned forward, studying me as if trying to reconcile 2 different versions of reality. You disappeared, she said quietly, and now you're... this. I didn't answer. I opened the file, sliding a document toward her. Your company coordinated 3 shipments tied to restricted logistics. Can you explain the off-site meetings with foreign nationals? Her expression hardened. I'm not answering anything without counsel. That's your right. Silence settled between us. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken history. She looked at my nameplate, then back at my face. You've changed. So have you. She exhaled slowly. I never imagined we'd meet like this. I kept my tone neutral. Neither did I. She leaned back, crossing her arms again. This is a misunderstanding. My company handles civilian contracts. If someone misused our information, it wasn't me. I slid another photo across the table, the parking garage image. This is you. She glanced down, then looked up quickly. That's a business meeting. With a flagged foreign contact. I don't know who that is. We can identify him. Her jaw tightened. She looked away, focusing on the blank wall for a moment. Then she returned her gaze to me. You think I'd do something like that? I think the evidence suggests involvement. She laughed softly, though it sounded strained. You always were serious, even as a kid, always trying to prove something. I didn't react. Let's stay on topic. She leaned forward again, voice lowering. You're enjoying this, aren't you, after all these years? Number. She studied my face, searching for something, anger, satisfaction, anything emotional. She didn't find it. That seemed to unsettle her more than accusation. You really don't feel anything, she asked. I paused. This isn't about feelings. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. She sat back, silent. Outside the room, footsteps passed, muffled. The camera recorded everything impartial. After a moment, she spoke again, quieter now. I want a lawyer. You'll have one. I gathered the documents and stood. As I reached the door, she spoke once more. I didn't think you'd come back like this. I paused, hand on the handle. Neither did I. Then I stepped out, closing the door behind me. The hallway felt cooler than before. Agents moved past, continuing their work. The operation had shifted from arrest to interrogation, from surprise to process. Inside the room, Emily sat alone, staring at the table. And for the first time since seeing her name, I understood that the distance between past and present had fully collapsed. She wasn't just a suspect. She was the same person who had once taken everything from me. Only now I held the file. By the time her attorney arrived, the morning had settled into a quiet rhythm. Analysts moved between rooms carrying folders and tablets, each step purposeful, measured. I stood in the observation area behind the one-way glass, watching Emily through the reflection. She hadn't moved much. Her posture remained upright, controlled, but her fingers tapped lightly against the table, an unconscious rhythm betraying tension. 15 years ago, she used the same motion when she was thinking quickly, constructing something in her head. The attorney entered, mid-50s, composed briefcase already open. He introduced himself, spoke quietly with her, then requested a summary of allegations. We provided the standard briefing: unauthorized data dissemination, financial irregularities, foreign contact. He nodded, asked procedural questions, and advised her to answer selectively. When he finished, he looked toward the glass, knowing we were watching. I stepped into the room. Emily's eyes followed me carefully this time, no longer shocked, just wary. "You're still leading?" she asked. "Yes." Her attorney folded his hands. "We'll cooperate within reason." I placed 3 documents on the table: financial transfer records, communication logs, and the surveillance stills. These accounts connect to shell corporations. Funds moved within hours of each meeting. "Can you explain the purpose?" Emily glanced at her lawyer, then back at me. "Consulting payments. From offshore entities tied to flagged contacts. International business happens," she replied. I slid another page forward, an intercepted message partially decoded. "This references shipment timing." She read it, then looked up. "You're interpreting that incorrectly." Her voice stayed steady, but I noticed her shoulders tighten. Small signals. The training had taught me to watch for them. "We also have server metadata," I continued. "Encrypted attachments transmitted from your office network." Her attorney interjected. "We'd like to review those materials before responding." "You'll receive them," I said. Silence stretched. Emily leaned back, studying me with a strange mix of curiosity and calculation. "You always liked puzzles," she said quietly. I didn't answer. Instead, I placed one final photo on the table, a clearer still from the parking garage, enhanced overnight. The foreign contact's face visible, Emily handing over a small envelope. Her composure faltered. "Just for a second. Enough." "That's circumstantial," her attorney said quickly. "Combined with financial trace and communications, it establishes probable coordination." Emily looked at the image again, then at me. "You think this proves something?" "I think it forms a pattern." Her eyes hardened. "You've been waiting for this, haven't you, ever since you left?" "Number." She leaned forward. "You want to believe I'm guilty? It fits your story." "This isn't about stories." Her expression shifted, frustration creeping in. "You don't even ask why, you just assume." I met her gaze. "Then tell me why." She hesitated. The attorney touched her arm lightly, a warning. But Emily spoke anyway. "Because business requires flexibility. Because clients ask for discretion. Because not everything fits neatly into your military boxes. That doesn't explain the transfers." Her voice rose slightly. "You don't understand how the civilian world works." I remained calm. "Help me understand." She laughed softly, though tension edged the sound. "You always did this, push quietly until people broke." I didn't respond. The silence pressed in. Finally, she looked away, exhaling slowly. Her fingers tapped the table again, faster now. I slid another document forward, an email recovered from her archive. It showed a draft withdrawal message from years earlier, stored under an old backup profile. Her name as sender. My address listed as recipient. She froze. "That account," she whispered. "We recovered it during the forensic sweep," I said. "It predates your company, but it confirms access." Her attorney leaned forward sharply. "We'll need to review chain of custody." Emily didn't hear him. She stared at the document, eyes narrowing. The room felt suddenly smaller. "You kept backups," I continued quietly, "even old ones." Her voice dropped. "That doesn't mean—" "It shows you created a message withdrawing my academy admission." The attorney shifted. We object to relevance. It establishes prior manipulation involving identity and communication. Emily looked up, anger flickering now. You brought this in here after all these years? You asked why I'd assume. Her hands clenched. You're twisting this. No, I'm establishing pattern. The calmness seemed to push her further. She leaned forward, voice sharp. You think one old email proves I'm some kind of traitor? I think it shows capability. She laughed bitterly. You always needed proof, even when you were a kid. I said nothing. Her shoulders sagged slightly as if the weight of the moment finally reached her. You don't even care why I did that, do you? I paused. You can tell me. The attorney tried to interrupt, but she continued. I was tired of you being the perfect one. The one everyone admired. You were leaving and suddenly everything was about you. I just changed it. The room went still. You impersonated me, I said. Yes, she exhaled. I told myself it was temporary, that you'd find something else. I didn't think it would last. And when they cut me off. Her eyes flickered. I didn't expect that. But you didn't correct it. She looked down. No. Silence followed, heavy and irreversible. The confession hung in the air, recorded undeniable. Her attorney closed his eyes briefly, already calculating damage control. Emily looked back at me, voice softer now. I never thought you'd come back like this. I answered quietly, neither did I. Outside the room, footsteps echoed faintly. The investigation had shifted again from suspicion to admission. Not complete, not yet, but enough to reshape everything. Emily leaned back, exhaustion replacing defiance. What happens now? We continue, I said, with everything. She nodded slowly, staring at the table. The woman who once controlled every conversation now sat silent, the truth finally surfacing after years buried beneath certainty. By late afternoon, the hallway outside the interview rooms had grown quieter. Most of the analysts had returned to their stations, leaving only a few officers moving between doors with measured urgency. The air felt still, as if the building itself were absorbing the weight of what had just been said. Inside the room, Emily sat with her attorney, her posture no longer rigid, but not collapsed either, somewhere in between, like someone recalculating a life she thought she controlled. I stepped away from the observation glass and walked toward the briefing room. The legal team was already reviewing the confession, cross-referencing it with the financial and communication evidence. The tone remained professional calm. They spoke in phrases like corroboration intent and prosecutorial threshold. No one mentioned family, no one mentioned history. It was just a case unfolding. A knock sounded behind me. One of the officers approached. There are 2 people asking to see you, he said quietly. They claim to be related to the suspect. I knew before he finished. They're in the waiting area. For a moment I didn't move. 15 years had passed without contact. No letters, no calls, just silence. Now they were here, drawn by the same gravity that had pulled everything else together. I nodded once. I'll speak with them. The waiting area smelled faintly of disinfectant and old upholstery. My parents sat side by side, hands clasped tightly. They looked older than I remembered. My father's shoulders had rounded slightly. My mother's hair carried more gray. When I entered, they both stood abruptly. They didn't recognize me immediately. The uniform, the posture, the controlled expression, it created distance. Then my mother's eyes widened. Is that... My father stepped forward slowly. It is. Silence stretched between us, thick and fragile. I saw recognition settle across their faces, followed by something heavier, shock, then uncertainty. You're here? My mother asked softly. Yes. My father cleared his throat. They told us you're in charge of this. I am. He looked down briefly, then back at me. We didn't know. I know. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We thought you left, that you didn't want anything to do with us. I held her gaze. I tried to explain. She closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her face. My father shifted his weight. They told us Emily confessed to something. We don't understand. She admitted to impersonating me years ago, I said calmly. She withdrew my academy admission. The words landed like a quiet detonation. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face drained of color. No, he whispered. Yes. My mother shook her head slowly. She told us you were scared. That you asked her. I didn't. The silence that followed felt longer than any interrogation. My father sank into the chair behind him, as if the strength left his legs. We believed her, he said quietly. I know. My mother's tears fell freely now. We told you to leave. I didn't answer. There was nothing to add. My father looked up at me, voice unsteady. And you still joined? Yes. He nodded slowly, absorbing it. All those years, we never even asked. The regret in his voice felt genuine but distant, like something arriving too late. I stood calmly, hands clasped behind my back. Years of discipline had taught me to hold emotion without letting it spill. What happens to her? My mother asked. The investigation continues. There's evidence of unauthorized data sharing. The charges will be determined by prosecutors. My father swallowed hard. Is she in serious trouble? Yes. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. We failed, both of you. The admission hung quietly. No dramatic apology, just truth. After a moment, my mother stepped forward. Can we see her? Yes, I said, but only briefly. They nodded, following an officer down the hallway. I remained where I was watching them go. The past and present moved together, now no longer separate timelines. Everything converged in this building. Minutes later, I passed the interview room again. Through the glass, I saw them seated across from Emily. My mother held her hand. My father spoke quietly. Emily looked exhausted, her composure finally slipping. I didn't listen. It wasn't my conversation. I continued down the hallway and stepped outside. The evening air carried the faint scent of rain. The sky had shifted to a muted gold, the kind that appears just before sunset. I stood there, letting the quiet settle. 15 years ago, I had walked away from my family with nothing but determination. Now I stood as the officer overseeing the case that revealed everything. Not revenge, not victory, just resolution. Behind me, the door opened. My father stepped out slowly. He approached, stopping a few feet away. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. But I needed you to know. We were wrong. I nodded once. The truth matters more than apology. He looked at me carefully, as if trying to memorize the person I had become. You're stronger than I realized. I allowed a faint, restrained smile. I had to be. He nodded, then returned inside. I remained outside, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The building lights flickered on one by one, illuminating the path ahead. For years, the lie had shaped everything. But the truth didn't need to shout. It waited quietly, gathering weight until the moment it could no longer be ignored. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been misunderstood, overlooked, or forced to rebuild alone, I'd like to hear where you're listening from. Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters, and stories like this remind us that truth often takes time, but it arrives. We share new stories every day, so consider subscribing and joining us. Let's keep walking this journey together.